Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum everyone. This is Amal Islam from the platform of telemedical education, and today's video is about anterior abdominal wall. If you find this video helpful in any case, please do subscribe our channel for more videos and more content. So let's begin with the introduction of the anterior abdominal wall. Here are some surface landmarks of the anterior abdominal wall. Abdomen is the area extending from the costal margin. You can follow my pointer. These are the costal margins and the pelvic brim, which means the pelvic inlet. So anteriorly and posteriorly, both between the pelvic inlet and the costal margin, lies the abdomen, and there are certain landmarks which you can appreciate with the naked eye. So of these, the most important one is the umbilicus. Umbilicus is the remnant of umbilical cord. We have this line of groin here, fold of groin, and in which lies the inguinal ligament. Then in very lean muscular people, here the line is drawn, but you can see on this side there is this line which is called linea semilunaris, and it marks the lateral boundary of the rectus sheath, or you can say the rectus abdominis muscle. Then we have the linea alba. This is a straight line in the middle of the abdomen on the anterior aspect. It extends from the Zephyr process to the pubic region, and you will see the reason for its formation in the coming slides, inshallah. Here is the very important point, McBurney's point. Here is the other point, which is McBurney's point. If you want to check the tenderness of the appendix, we palpate this point here, and it is not a visible landmark like all these. We have to draw an imaginary line from the anterior superior iliac spine to the umbilicus. From the umbilicus to the anterior superior iliac spine, then we have to take the lateral 1/3 and the medial 2/3, and this point of demarcation of the lateral 1/3 and medial 2/3 marks the McBurney's point. And again, you check the tenderness of the appendix, and again if you have confirmed the case of the appendicitis, you make the incision here. Starting with the umbilicus, umbilicus is the remnant or the vestige of the umbilical cord, and whenever there is a vestigial structure, it is in the form of the ligament or the scar, because at the end the fibrous tissue, it fills the gap in the body. So the composition of this umbilicus, it is a normal scar tissue consisting of dense fibrous tissue at the fetal end of the umbilical cord. A very important question regarding viva in the prof, the position of the umbilicus. Umbilicus lies between the 3rd and 4th lumbar vertebrae. So you must remember it, umbilicus lies between the 3rd and 4th lumbar vertebrae. So what is the anatomical significance of the umbilicus? First significance, of course, is that it is the remnant of the umbilical cord, but it is called the watershed line. Watershed line has two meanings. Firstly, that this is the umbilicus, this is the level at which we have umbilicus, then watershed means that all the lymph above the level of this line flows upward, and all the lymphatic vessels below the level of this line flows downward. It's very simple that we call the level a watershed line if all the lymphatics, they flow upward above that level, and the lymphatics below flow downward. Above we have axillary lymph nodes to which the lymphatics may flow, and below we have superficial inguinal lymph node. Another definition of the watershed line is that, or the watershed point is that, it is the point where the terminal branches of two main arterial trunks, they meet, or they anastomose. So when we will see the blood supply of the abdomen, we will see that it is also the point where the terminal branches or terminal arteries of the arterial trunks, they anastomose. Another important significance of the umbilicus is that it is the point where there is anastomose of portocaval circulation. In the abdomen, we have the portal circulation as well as caval circulation. anastomos of the portal cable circulation. So when there is cirrhotic liver, or in any case there is other reason for hypertension, so the vessels surrounding the umbilicus which are taking part in the anastomos, they swell, and you can have the patient with these visible swelled vessels on the abdomen, and these are called caput medusae. Coming to the anterior abdominal wall, if you are going to enter the peritoneal cavity, which is the purpose of the surgery in the abdomen, and in any case if you are doing the dissection, so the following structures come your way from the exterior to the interior. Outermost we have skin everywhere in the body, and below skin there is subcutaneous tissue. But the thing about the subcutaneous tissue of the anterior abdominal wall is that it has two layers. The superficial fatty layer, Camper's fascia, in this layer there is a fat, and then we have the membranous layer which is called the Scarpa's fascia. And yes, the thing to remember is that you can appreciate these two layers of superficial fascia below the level of umbilicus, not above the level of umbilicus. Okay, so below the level of the umbilicus, the subcutaneous tissue, it has two layers, the Camper's fascia and the Scarpa's fascia. After you remove the subcutaneous tissue, you will see the external oblique muscle. Beneath this you will see the internal oblique muscle, then transversus abdominis muscle. Below this muscle we have a fascia which is called transversalis fascia. The purpose of this fascia is to separate these muscles from the extraperitoneal fat. And beneath this extraperitoneal fat we have parietal peritoneum, which is the outer layer of the covering which covers the peritoneum. We have two layers, parietal and visceral peritoneum. So yes, the parietal peritoneum is separated from the fascia transversalis by extraperitoneal fat, and the fascia transversalis separates these muscle layers from the extraperitoneal fat, you may say. In this slide you can see this line. Along this line, the superficial fascia of the abdomen, it fuses with the fascia of the thigh, and here is the thing you may see, this line, this is called Holden's line. Holden's line, it is an imaginary line about 8 cm moving lateral to the pubic tubercle, and along this line, Holden's line, and squarely here you can see this is the line of the union of the superficial fascia of the abdomen with the thigh. And this line is such that if there is extravasation of urine from the urethra, so it won't go down the thigh because of this Holden's line. So here you can again see the layers of the abdomen. Firstly we have skin, then we have superficial fascia which has two layers. This is the fatty layer, you can see the fat in this layer, and then we have the membranous layer. Beneath then there lies the three muscles: external oblique muscle, internal oblique muscle, transversus abdominis muscle. In the center, if you take the cross section from the center of abdomen, you will also see the rectus abdominis muscle, because that lies in the center. And beneath this muscle there is fascia transversalis which separates this muscle from this extraperitoneal fat, and beneath this extraperitoneal fat lies the parietal peritoneum. About the muscle, we have three flat muscles, two vertical muscles. These flat muscles, external oblique muscle, internal oblique muscle, transversus abdominis muscle, they cover the abdomen like a collar. And we have two vertical muscles which of rectus abdominis muscle and pyramidalis muscle. Rectus abdominal muscle you can only appreciate if you take the cross section in the middle of the abdomen in the anterior part, and the pyramidalis muscle, this is a very small muscle and it is also a vestigious muscle with no recognized function till now. So this is the external oblique muscle. The external oblique muscle, it originates, you can see the green color muscle fibers originating from the lower 7 ribs. After originating from these, the fibers, they move medially and little downward to meet in the midline, and it gets inserted in the iliac crest as well as pubic tubercle. important thing to understand here is that half of the muscle is fleshy and half is aponeurotic. In the middle part you can only find the aponeurosis of the muscle. There is this is the anterior aspect of the external oblique muscle. You can see the fleshy fibers originating from the ribs, and these fibers, they move medially a little downward and they meet in the midline in the aponeurotic form and gets inserted on the iliac crest and the pubic tubercle. So here is the inguinal ligament and how this ligament is formed. If I go back to the previous slide, the aponeurosis of the external oblique muscle is thickened in this part between the anterior superior iliac spine and pubic tubercle. In this part, and this aponeurotic part thickens to form the inguinal ligament. You can see beneath this muscle, this ligament, it is basically just the thickened part of the aponeurosis of external oblique muscle and nothing else. Beneath this we have the femoral vessels passing in the thigh. So this is the inguinal ligament in the green color. And here is a thing, mid-inguinal point and midpoint of inguinal ligament, they are not the same thing. Midpoint of inguinal ligament, because they both are landmarks to important things, so we must understand what is the mid-inguinal point and what is the midpoint of inguinal ligament. Here you can see that mid-inguinal point. Mid-inguinal point is the center point from the pubic symphysis to anterior superior iliac spine. This is anterior superior iliac spine and this is pubic symphysis, and if you take the distance between them, the midpoint of this is mid-inguinal point. But if you take the inguinal ligament which extends from the anterior superior iliac spine to the pubic tubercle, the midpoint of this is called the midpoint of inguinal ligament. This is the internal oblique muscle. Unlike the external oblique muscle, internal oblique muscle originates from below. It originates from the iliac crest, from the inguinal ligament as well as pecten pubis, and its fibers move upward and medially. Again, in the midline there is aponeurosis, and here you can see that they are just extending to the lower two ribs. The insertion is in the lower two ribs, so they are not crossing the costal margin, unlike external oblique muscle. This is rectus abdominis muscle, and it is a vertical muscle, lies in the center part. Again, the two parts, they meet in the midline, and this line, it forms the linea alba, and it originates from below, from the pubic tubercle and pecten pubis, and inserts on the xiphoid process in the corresponding costal cartilages, and it has tendinous intersections, you can see. And this is transversus abdominis muscle, which is the deepest of all the muscles, and it originates from, again, iliac crest, inguinal ligament, as well as from the ribs, because this is the horizontal muscle. Its fibers are running horizontally, unlike the external oblique and internal oblique. So it also originates from the ribs. You can say from the 7th to 12th ribs, as well as from below, from the iliac crest, inguinal ligament, and again its fiber meet in the midline, and this is the deepest of the all muscles. And this is the small vestigious pyramidalis muscle, which has no recognized function, and it is not that important. After we trespass these muscles, we come across fascia transversalis. Fascia transversalis is a thin aponeurotic membrane. It lies between the transversus abdominis muscle and extraperitoneal fat. And in this picture you can clearly see we have this skin, this superficial fascia, and then we have this aponeurosis of external oblique muscle. This is internal oblique muscle originating from below, and this is the transversus abdominis muscle. And on the inside of transversus abdominis muscle, this is the fascia which separates this muscle from the extraperitoneal fat, and this fascia is called fascia transversalis. And this fascia transversalis has an opening in it which is called the deep opening, and it lies about 1.2 centimeter above the mid-inguinal point. Here we will have this inguinal ligament, and if you calculate the mid-inguinal point, it lies 1.2 centimeter above the mid-inguinal point, and this opening is called internal ring, or you may call it deep ring, and it is present in the fascia transversalis, of course. And we will see it allows passage through the spermatocord and the round ligament, spermatocord in male and the round ligament in the female. And here a tunnel is formed for these structures to pass, which is called the inguinal canal. You can see in this picture this canal well. Okay, so here is in this picture you can see this is the inguinal ligament, these are the femoral artery and vein coming below, and here this is a important structure which is called lacunal ligament. Actually, a part of the inguinal ligament is reflected, triangular in shape, and it gets inserted on the pecten pubis just to provide strength in this part. We have a opening here which is called the superficial ring, so this part is weak potentially. So just to provide strength in part, we have this extension of the inguinal ligament which is called the lacunal ligament, and also we have this conjoint tendon. It's also mentioned in books that this conjoint tendon, you can see this labeling here, it's referring to this part. Conjoint tendon is formed by the union of aponeurosis of internal oblique and transversus abdominis muscle. Basically, internal oblique muscle, this is the aponeurosis of internal oblique muscle, and this is the along with the aponeurosis of the transversus abdominis muscle, and both the aponeurosis they form the conjoint tendon in this part which gets inserted on the pecten pubis. So this conjoint tendon along with the lacunal ligament, they provide strength in this part. You can see in this picture we have this transversus abdominis muscle and this internal oblique muscle which has again aponeurosis in the middle part. So both the aponeurosis of this transversus abdominis muscle and internal oblique muscle, they unite to form this conjoint tendon. The other name of the conjoint tendon is inguinal aponeurotic falx, and it provides strength in the lower part of the abdomen where there is opening for the superficial opening of the external oblique aponeurosis. Then we are going to discuss rectus sheath. Rectus sheath is formed by aponeurosis of three flat muscles. We have seen all the muscles, external oblique muscle, internal oblique muscle. And this is the cut section of the external oblique. Then we have internal oblique. Then we have transversus abdominis muscle. And in the middle we have this rectus abdominis muscle. So basically the aponeurosis of both three muscle, it unite to form a sheath which covers the rectus abdominis muscle anteriorly as well as posteriorly in some part, and this sheath is called rectus sheath. It is a very important question for your prof. It comes in written, so understand it well. I'll repeat: the aponeurosis of the three muscle, external oblique muscle, internal oblique muscle, and transversus abdominis muscle. You can see in this part, this is the aponeurosis, and it forms a sheath which covers the rectus abdominis muscle anteriorly as well as in some part posteriorly. So we come to know that the rectus abdominis muscle, it has two layers, anterior layer as well as the part which covers it posteriorly is the posterior layer. So think about anterior layer. You must remember three things: that it is continuous, and it is continuous means that it is present from the from above costal margin to below, that it is not deficient in any of its part. The next thing is that you must remember that its composition is variable. Like we'll see that above costal margin, the muscle aponeurosis which is forming it is different in the middle part it is different, and in the inferior part it is different. But the posterior layer is not variable. It is not continuous as well. It is not present in the coastal margin area, and it is not present below the arcuate line. It is present only in the center part. But yes, it is not variable. Its composition is more or less same. So this is the picture from our books BD Jurassica, and this is very important and very easy to figure out. So here these are the ribs, 5th, 6th and 7th ribs. At the level of ribs, and this is the rectus abdominis muscle, there is only anterior layer of the rectus sheath. There is no posterior layer. So at the coastal margin, above the coastal margin, you can say the anterior layer of the rectus abdominis muscle or rectus sheath is formed by external oblique muscle only. In the middle part, external oblique muscle, internal oblique muscle, they both form the anterior sheath, anterior layer, and the internal oblique muscle and transversus abdominis muscle, they form the posterior layer of the rectus sheath, as well as fascia transversalis is always there. And in the below the arcuate line, all the three muscles, external oblique muscle, internal oblique muscle and transversus abdominis muscle, they all are uniting, their aponeuroses are uniting to form the anterior layer only. And in the posterior layer we again have fascia transversalis. So we can see that the posterior layer composition is variable. And it is not just variable, a posterior layer is not present in the coastal margin area as well as below the arcuate line. It is only present in the part from the below coastal margin to the umbilicus. And next very important thing, that this arcuate line, it is present at this level. We have seen it in the very first slide. The demarcation or the lower boundary of the posterior layer is marked by this arcuate line. It means that level where the posterior layer of the rectus sheath ends marks the arcuate line, and this is linea semilunaris. Linea semilunaris is the point where the all three muscles, they meet with the lateral boundary of the rectus abdominis muscle. So here you can appreciate on surface landmarks the linea semilunaris, and at this level we have the arcuate line. Coming to next very important topic is inguinal canal. We have seen when we were checking the layers that this is the inguinal ligament, which is the thickened part of the aponeurosis of external oblique muscle. Then we have internal oblique muscle, we have transversus abdominis muscle, and beneath that we have the fascia transversalis. And in the fascia transversalis, 1.2 centimeter above the mid inguinal point, there was an opening called the deep opening, which provides passage for the spermatic cord in male and the round ligament for the female. So here you can see this is the structure, the spermatic cord, and it has to pass in the perineum. So a tunnel is present. A 4 centimeter tunnel is present in the lower part of the abdomen. You can see this passage along which this, you can see the round ligament or the spermatic cord to pass, and there is this opening on the fascia transversalis, the deep opening, and then we have this opening, the superficial opening in the external oblique aponeurosis, you can see. So this canal is called inguinal canal, which is a 4 centimeter canal in the lower part of the abdomen, and it provides passage for the transport of the spermatic cord in males and the round ligament in females. To understand it, we have this figure here. It is a canal, so it must have anterior wall, it must have floor, it must have the posterior wall, and it must have a roof. So discussing these, the anterior wall, of course, in the if you will look from the anterior aspect, you can see the skin. Outermost we have skin, then we have superficial fascia, and then we have the external oblique aponeurosis, in which we have this opening for the exit. So anterior wall, you can say anterior wall is composed of skin, superficial fascia, and external oblique. And the posterior wall, we have the deep inguinal ring, and we have already discussed this deep inguinal ring was present in the fascia transversalis. So the posterior wall is supposed to be formed by the fascia transversalis. Floor is formed by the inguinal canal. You can see that this tunnel is passing, and in its floor lies the inguinal canal. That's why it is said that the lateral part of the inguinal canal is smooth from upwards, but the medial part in which lies this canal, it is grooved upward. It is grooved because it is providing passage, it is forming the floor of the canal. And then roof, it is formed by the arching fibers of the internal oblique and transversus abdominis muscle. Again, we have supporting structures in the medial side. We have conjoint tendon, and we have that lacunal ligament, which I told earlier. They were here to support this area because it has a potential weakness. There may be any herniation in this part because there is this opening. And in the lateral aspect, we have also some fibers from the internal oblique, which is basically forming the roof. But you can say that laterally we have some fibers of the internal oblique as well. And then there is this Hazelbach triangle, which is called the area of potential weakness, and this is the inguinal canal. And this Hazelbach triangle, basically it is the triangular area which have the boundaries. Below you can see the inguinal canal. Laterally we have the inferior epigastric artery, and medially we have the lateral wall of the rectus abdominis muscle. And this area, it forms the Hazelbach triangle, which is an area of potential weakness. And from this area there may be herniation of the abdominal contents. These are the spermatocore's contents. There are 3 arteries: testicular artery, chymastatic artery, differential artery. There are 3 veins, and there are 3 nerves. And this is a very frequently asked question in prof, so you must prepare it very well. And then our last topic is the hernia. In the abdomen we come across hernia very commonly, but I will discuss here inguinal hernia, which may be indirect or which may be direct. Basically, hernia means protrusion of the abdominal content, and you can see them protruding under the skin with visible and you can see them protruding under the skin with naked eyes. So classifying them as direct and indirect means this direct hernia, it bursts through the weakened fascia of the abdominal wall directly behind the superficial ring. Means that the direct hernia, it can directly trespass the superficial ring because there is an area of weakness behind the superficial ring. But the indirect hernia, it follows the path of the inguinal canal. Indirect means it is not directly coming out of the anterior abdominal wall or the superficial ring. It is following the course of the spermatic cord, like the spermatic cord lies in the inguinal canal, so this follows the same course as spermatic cord. It enters the inguinal canal at the deep ring and then it exits at the superficial ring. So here it is a very good picture. You can see these are the loops of the bowel. This is the fascia transversalis. Then we have this is the peritoneum, this is the fascia transversalis and the 3 muscles of the abdomen. And then this opening is in the fascia transversalis, which is the deep opening, and we have the superficial opening. And you can see the part of the loop of the bowel, it is entering the deep ring along with the spermatic cord, and it is following the same course as spermatic cord, and then it is exiting the superficial ring, and then it enters the your pelvic cavity or the perineum. So this is not coming directly out of superficial ring or the anterior abdominal wall, but it is following the course of the inguinal canal and the spermatic cord. So this one is the indirect hernia. Direct hernia would come straight out of here. And yes, this is a very good picture of the umbilical hernia. Umbilical, as we have talked, that it is a scar tissue, and if it is not strong enough, if there is excessive exertional force in the abdomen, if there is excessive pressure, then the loop of the intestine, it may protrude through the umbilicus as well. And this is the very good picture of the umbilical hernia. And here is the arterial supply of the abdomen. We have the superior epigastric artery, we have inferior epigastric artery. The superior epigastric artery, it is the branch of the internal thoracic artery. Then we have inferior epigastric artery from the internal iliac artery. And then we have superficial epigastric artery from the femoral artery. And when I talked about the watershed line or watershed point, I said that it is also the point where the branches, terminal branches from the arterial trunk, the anastomose. So you can see perfectly here that the branches from the superior epigastric artery and the inferior epigastric artery, they are meeting at this level. And laterally we have lateral cutaneous branches of posterior intercostal arteries. So all these arteries, they form the blood supply of the abdomen. And lastly we have the nerves. These are the anterior cutaneous nerves and the lateral cutaneous nerves from the ventral rami of the T6 to T12. Then we have rectus abdominis muscle, and which is penetrated by all these nerves. Then we have iliohypogastric nerve coming from below, ilioinguinal nerve, and this is the inguinal ligament. So the branches, cutaneous branches of the abdomen, they come from basically ventral rami of T6 to T12 as well as from the L1. So this is the anterior abdominal wall. I hope you have grabbed all the points. Thank you for listening, and yes, do subscribe our channel for more videos and more content. Thank you, and Allah Hafiz.